Hey folks, Paul Abernathy here. Welcome to another episode of Mastering the NEC. Again, my name is Paul Abernathy, and I am CEO and President of Electrical Code Academy. We're the ones that teach you the National Electrical Code. Hopefully you've purchased one of our courses, had a chance to watch some of our videos. Maybe you're even a subscriber over on our Fast Tracks Tube video platform. Today, we're going to kind of look at a little bit of the insights that took place on one issue with Code Making Panel 5. Just got back from the NFPA second draft meetings, and a lot of good work was done there. But I want to give you a little insight on the kind of things that can go on at some of these meetings when you put a bunch of experts in the room and you have differences of opinions or the way you look at things, and how that can change when you walk outside of the room and just into the general discussion area after you have a serious debate. So in the 2026 NEC second draft, there was a public comment that wanted to clarify on the exact location that you would connect in a Ferrous raceway if you had a grounding electrode conductor running through it and you were coming through that raceway into a cabinet or enclosure. Let's say there's a main breaker in there. You have a grounded terminal bus with the main bonding jumper in there that connects the grounded conductor to the enclosure, right? Typical service. And you ran your grounding electrode conductor to, let's say, a water pipe ground, but you ran it through a Ferrous raceway, okay? I'd like a steel EMT. I don't know why you do that, but if you did, since it is a Ferrous raceway, the code says that you have to bond it at both ends. So that's 250.64E. So during the meeting, the public comment came up by a well-noted educator who submitted it. And I simply asked, because we really weren't addressing his question. And so I asked the question out loud to the group. I said, okay, so what the public comment is saying in 250.64E was, if you have a cabinet with a main breaker, a grounded terminal bus, a main bonding jumper, so it's all intimate, connected together, and you come out of that with an EMT, steel EMT, and you go down to a water pipe ground electrode, and you run the grounding electrode conductor, say a bare, let's say number 4, out and into that Ferrous raceway down to the water pipe ground. The National Electrical Code says, since it is a Ferrous raceway, that you have to bond the grounding electrode conductor to the Ferrous raceway at each end to create parallel paths, right? So we don't create what's called a choke effect. And so we're familiar with that. The question that was submitted to the panel was, where should that connection be made at the enclosure? Are you implying that it has to be made at immediately the point of entry into the enclosure? Or can it be at the bus? And so when this was presented to the panel, almost unanimously, everybody said that it needed to be made the point it enters into the cabinet. Okay. It's not what the code says, but that is their interpretation. So I wanted clarity, so I asked the question on the record to the group. And I do this sparingly for my own benefit and edification. Just so you know, I usually ask certain questions in these meetings just for clarity and making sure that it gets on the record. And so asking everybody on the code panel 5, they were like, yes, that was the intent. And then some people said, well, I don't think that's what the submitter was asking. Well, I asked the submitter, and he says that's exactly what he was asking. Okay. So let me show you the code, and then I will explain a little bit of what's going on with this. So let's go look at the code really quick. Okay, so here is from our grounding and bonding course real quick. And this is paraphrasing it directly from the NEC. And we're only going to look at item number 1 and item number 2, because that's really all that's germane to the topic right now. So we're looking at 250.64E. So if you've got your code books, you want to pause the video, you want to go open it up. This is what it says under the 2023 edition of the National Electrical Code. We'll also look and see what it's going to look like in the 2026 edition so far. Okay, so it did get approved for the new look, but we'll kind of go look at that in a second. So here's what it is in 2023, right here, 25064E. It says for raceways, cable armor, and enclosures for grounding electrode conductors. So this is where you run the grounding electrode conductor, that bare copper or whatnot, from the panel through this raceway down to whatever electrode, okay? I was assuming that you're running it through this raceway because we're protecting it against physical damage, or it's in a location it's subject to physical damage, or electricians and engineers don't work together and somebody just specifies it to be put in a raceway, and for some reason you choose a ferrous metal raceway, okay? Like steel EMT, for example, or steel rigid or something like that, rather than Schedule 80 PVC or something like that, or an aluminum raceway that's non-ferrous, okay? All right, so here's the number one general rule. It says ferrous metal raceways, as I've just described, enclosures and cable armor for grounding electrode conductors must be electrically continuous from the point of attachment to the cabinet or equipment to the grounding electrode. Now let's stop there first. So really what this is saying is if you have a cabinet and I'm going to the electrode, that whether I have segments of protection on different raceways, for example, if they're ferrous, they need to act as one. Okay, so I'll show you a picture of that so that you get an understanding of what we're talking about. So it needs to be continuous, or it needs to be electrically continuous, and you have to make it so with various jumpers to make it electrically continuous. Don't worry, I'll show you a picture in case that confuses you. All right, and it says and must be securely fastened to the ground clamp and fitting. Okay, again, we're talking about the raceway and the enclosure, okay? So that's the first part. Next, it says ferrous metal raceways, enclosures, and cable armor must be bonded at each end of the raceway or enclosure to the grounding electrode or grounding electrode conductor to create an electrically parallel path, okay? So all it's saying here is that, okay, so in order to achieve the first part of this, if we have a ferrous metal raceway, then I need to bond each end of it to the grounding electrode conductor or to the electrode, okay, in order to complete this process. Okay, makes sense. And then, of course, the last part is non-ferrous. You don't need to do a bond it at each end. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, so we already got that one. Let's change that color. Okay, so don't worry about the non-ferrous. We're not required to be electrically continuous. It's still metal. You got to bond it. It just doesn't have to be continuous. Okay, so what are we looking at first? So first thing, I think it's important for us to look at an illustration real quick. All right, and we'll come back to the bonding methods in 250.92B2 through B4. We'll look at that in a minute. All right, so let's go down here and look at an illustration real quick. Okay, so here's what we've got. All right, let me scroll up a little bit. There we go. So here is our cabinet, and it's got a main breaker in it. So let's just say this is your service. Here, right here, this is your main bonding jumper. So this is all acting as one, right? And so here is our water pipe ground, and I'll kind of break each piece of this here. So the GEC grounding electrode conductor comes down through this raceway, which is a nipple, but still a raceway, through and into this enclosure, which is an enclosure that is enclosing the grounding electrode conductor, as we talked about. So that's an enclosure. And then it's running through this raceway, okay? And this raceway is ferrous. This enclosure is ferrous, right? And this enclosure, we'll say, is ferrous. And then it comes on down and it goes through this raceway, which is non-ferrous. This is just a non-ferrous raceway down here. It could be aluminum, could be PVC, whatever, obviously non-ferrous. Okay, all right, so what it's saying is that when you enclose a ferrous raceway or an enclosure or cable armor, and we'll just go with this enclosure, or we could go with this one down here, doesn't matter, that you bond each end of it, okay? All right, so in this case right here, where it comes through, here's the bond for this end, right? Plus it's bonding this side of this enclosure. It's also bonding to this side of the raceway. This side is getting bonded to the grounding electroconductor like it's stated, because it's ferrous. And on this side, if this connection right here complies with 250-92B, 2 through B4, then it's done here. But you see they connected here. So theoretically, this side is connected on this side of this raceway. This side is on this side of the raceway. Both of them are connected to the GEC. Good. On this side, you see that it's connected on this side right here. Okay, one way to do it. And it also covers this side of this enclosure. Now, the question was to the committee was, once it entered into the cabinet, the question point blank was asked, do you connect it right here with a lay-in lug? Do you have to connect to this raceway, Ferrous Raceway, right here? And overwhelmingly, the committee said yes. Then that was the question that was being asked. They said yes. So I brought up and said, okay, so I want to make sure this is on record. You're saying that you believe that you have to make this connection to the grounding electroconductor right here. Like a lay-in lug is actually the language that I used. I said, so you got to bring this GEC through, bring it through a lay-in lug, and then take it here. They were like, yes. Okay. So the problem with that is when we had a break right after that, I pulled out this image and I showed it to some of the key members on the committee. I said, so what you're saying is the code says that I have to connect the GEC, okay, to the Ferrous Raceway or enclosure at each end. Yes, but you're telling me it has to be immediately at the point that it enters into the enclosure? Yes. Then I showed this picture and I asked, I said, so what's your theory behind that? Because whether I do this, and I'll show you the graphic, whether I do this right here or right here, it's irrelevant. Because if this connection right here is done in compliance with 250-92B 2 through B4, then it is intimate with this enclosure. And so whether I make this connection right here or right here is irrelevant. Because right here, if I lay the lug here and I lay the GEC through it, right, then it makes a connection to this raceway. If I lay the GEC right here with this main bonding jumper in it that connects the enclosure to this grounding electroconductor intimately right here, okay? Also following all the rules in 250.24 as well. So what's the difference whether I lay it here or lay it here? And, they were like, well, the distance could create a problem with parallel. No. Look, folks, there's no guidance on that in the NEC. It just says that you connected at both ends. It doesn't say within 6 inches, within 2 inches. Okay, look, example in this picture right here. Okay, there's a distance here. Right? So whether you lay and lug it here or it's done here is irrelevant. The GEC is connected to the Ferrous Raceway at both ends. Since this connection right here is compliance with 250.92B 2 through 4, means that this is probably going to be no concentric or eccentric KO, because I can tell you that this is a bonding lock nut. You can't see it, but there's a little screw right there. So all of the knockouts have been done, so have been removed. So this connection complies with 250.92B. And so in this case, this is compliant. And when I showed this image, there was a change of heart and said, oh, well, yeah, this is okay. But when I graphically expressed it during the meeting, no, it had to go through a lay and lug right here. It's the only way it can be compliant. That is not correct, folks. So as long as you come into your enclosure, if you're protecting your GEC with a Ferrous Raceway, You have to connect it at both ends to the grounding electroconductor. Right? Down here, they're doing it right here. On this side, they're doing it right here. Here's your GEC. Here's your bus bar. Here's your main bonding jumper, which connects it intimately with the enclosure. They're all connected together because this connection is compliant with 250.92b. So it doesn't have to be a lay and lug here. This is perfectly okay. And this is how it's depicted in almost every educator's publication out there. Okay, whether it's Fred Hartwell's, whether it's a Staucup publication, whether it's a Mike Holt publication, whether it's a one of mine or any of that. Okay, this is how it's depicted because it doesn't matter in this case whether it's done at the bus or the moment that enters into the enclosure. Okay, all right. So all we wanted to do was clarify, and this is just an example of how you can be in the room with a lot of technical experts, and they're all great, but you can say, guys, let's talk about something here. When the code said, and that's all the public comment was trying to achieve, because let's go look and see what the changes are. All right, so here is what it says in the current language of the NEC right here. Now see how it's kind of all in one just rambling sentence. And oh, by the way, here's the methods of bonding. And again, you see it's 250.92b, B2 through B4. Okay, in our case, it was all the KOs are gone and it's using a bonding bushing, right? With the bonding lock nut. But to kind of show you what it's going to look like, this is what it's going to look like in 2026. Now I can show you the markup language. You see how it was marked up, but here's what you're going to get. It's going to be broken into an itemized list, and it says Raceways, cable armor, and enclosures that contain grounding electroconductors that comply with 250.6 for E1A or 250.6 for E1B. Okay, so A is the ferrous, B is the non-ferrous, so simply just broke it up, and it's again. Ferrous metal raceways, enclosures, and cable armor for the grounding electroconductor shall comply with the following. Number one, be electrically continuous from the point of attachment to the cabinet or equipment to the grounding electrodes. So this is really talking about from the cabinet as it leaves to the electrodes. So if you have multiple sections of protection with a ferrous raceway, then each one of those sections has to be bonded at each end to the grounding electroconductor to make it electrically continuous, okay? Now, the one end that's connected to the cabinet is already connected. So again, as I've shown previously, you don't have to do anything as long as that connection, that bonding of that raceway to that cabinet complies with 250.92B2 through B4, either one of those options there, okay? Next, to be securely fastened to the ground clamp or the fitting. And 3, be bonded at each end of the raceway, cable armor, or enclosure to the grounding electrode or grounding electrode conductor to create an electrically parallel path, right? And as we have shown here, that this grounding electrode conductor right here is connected at both ends. This end, it's all intimate. It's all connected together right here through all these connections to this side of the GEC. And then this side is done with this jumper right here. All done right here. Okay? Everything's done right here. Okay? So this image is just trying to show you different ways to do it. But just so you can see, this is what it's going to look like in the 2026 edition. And I'll show you, see how it's all marked up and how it's going to be. This is from the first draft markup. And here's how it's finally going to look. Okay? All right. So hopefully we cleared that up, because I, through the years, have gotten plenty of questions from people saying, well, wait a minute, do I have to use a lay and lug the moment that that GEC comes into the cabinet? And no, if that GEC goes to the enclosure, goes to the bus, and that is bonded to the enclosure, then it is acting as one. As long as that raceway that's protecting the GEC is connected to the cabinet in one of the allowances in 250.92B2 through B4. Or if it's not, it has a bonding jumper from, let's say, a bonding bushing up to the bus. Okay, so again, if that's the case, then it can take place at the bus like we showed. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, but this is just an example when you can present something and there's a public comment and then everybody gets asked about it and they get it wrong, only to go out into the room after the break and agree that it was that was okay. All right, folks. We'll see you in some upcoming videos. Hopefully you learned something from that one.